From deep within, well, a muddy, radioactive meme land, we are the survivors of the apocalypse, the few, the brave, the bitchy, once more wading into battle against the froggy hordes with Rantzerker teal deer style number 82. That's quite a mouthful. Men's rights activists feel up the phallus, which is also sort of a mouthful. Okay, so
I see what you did there.
You do. Okay. We have started our Australia fundraiser, so if you want to see us go to Down Under, please go to www.feedthebadger.com and put a few shekels in the hat. After all, it's the land of snakes. That's where we should be. I mean, we're badgers.
Speaking of phalluses.
Yeah. Okay. I guess they could be sort of like flexible, venomous phallus. Yeah.
Down
all right.
Under.
And in addition, if you want to join us for the after show, which will be titled Phallus Uncut, please go to www.patreon.com/honeybadgerradio. Just $5 a month gets you access to all of our after shows and our Discord server, which is a fire hose of shit posting. If you're listening to this after the live show and you want to hear the full stream, go to www.honeybadgerradio.com for our unabridged podcasts, or look up to the right of this video. There's a link to go directly to the unabridged version on YouTube.
Do we need to set it up? Set up the clip,
you're right.
like David Letterman or something.
You mean like context?
Yes.
We're doing that now, are we?
I don't know.
We're giving them context. We're not just throwing them into the vat.
Well, I can give them suitable context if they'd really like it. It goes something along the lines of, oh God, it hurts, it really, really burns, why am I reading this? I'm going to jam forks in my eyes, please make it stop.
Sounds about right.
Yeah. It's, to give a little bit more context, that's like the emotional context. The actual physical context is this is an academic paper. A legitimate academic paper on men's rights activism, presumably.
This is robust.
This is robust.
Yes.
It's a feminist approach to men's rights activism. The title of the piece is not on my... I don't have it offhand. It's something like, men's rights have feelings. Men's rights activists have feelings. What are we going to do about it?
It's the phallic effect, or why men's rights activists have feelings.
Because they don't have feelings because they're human beings, obviously.
Mm-hmm. Well, that would be the immediate answer. It would be a very short paper then. It's like, why do men's rights activists have feelings? Answer, they are human beings. Well, thanks for that, Grant.
Phallic effect, or why men's rights activists have feelings. Jonathan A. Allen. Abstract. The men's rights movement, and its academic offshoot, New Male Studies, are considered in light of the turn to effect. I argue that effective utterances, I feel, become phallic in the men's rights movement and function in a defensive mode, unlike the phallus as guarantor of masculinity, which is currently up for debate. The effective utterance cannot be denied, that is, effect is wholly subjective. However, we can, as theorists, ask questions about how and why effect is being used.
Okay, have we overloaded a bit on the word effect here?
Have we overloaded a bit on words?
Yeah, well, in this instance, they're using the term effect because they're going to be using effect theory in this, which isn't actually as super-duper crazy as it sounds, because it's basically just the expression of emotion and how people express emotion, and usually it'll tie into things like body language and paralanguage, you know, like the sounds that you use to communicate. So that's sort of all it is, but some of the ways they've put it in sentences here just seems a little bit weird. Basically, like, you feel something and the emotional reaction is something to do with your dick. It's kind of bizarre. So I looked up New Male Studies, and it is actually a publication. Now, I decided just to sort of see, like, well, it is a publication. Does it have any merit or is any credence given to it in academia? I looked it up on SJR, which is basically trying to find the journal's impact factor. It didn't exist. So that was kind of a, okay, this academic journal doesn't exist according to the SJR archive, which is a little bit weird because they have literally everything. The only thing I could find was on Psychology Wiki. Yep, that's the only place I could find referencing new media studies, and it suggested that the impact factor of that journal is 0.0. Now, that I suppose I should explain impact factor for people who don't know what that is. Basically, an impact factor of a journal is the number of citations to articles. So if you've got a load of articles published in your journal and people then cite those articles, that's what it's tabulating. So if 10 people cite one article and you've only got one article, you would in theory have an impact factor of 10 because you've got 10 citations to that thing. That's what it is. It's the ratio between the number of times articles in your journal are cited. And that basically means that the new male studies literature is cited 0 times anywhere, ever. That's really fucking bad. Well, it basically gives you an idea of how incredibly isolated this is in academia.
Oh yeah, it's very isolated.
The journal Men and Masculinities isn't much better at 0.8, so...
The thing is that the reason why this is isolated is because the academics involved in the new male studies are not, they're not within the feminist orthodoxy.
Yes.
So they do not look at masculinity and men and boys in the context of feminist theory.
The interesting thing about social sciences in general, especially when it comes to like the feminist sock just side of it, is about 70 to 80% of all stuff published in social sciences is never cited once. I mean, this is why all of these journals, like these men and masculinity journals, it's like 0.8 for impact factor. No one gives a shit about most of it. This is why when you go through the feminist assertion nonsense and you take it all back to the origin point, you tend to find there's only about a dozen or so columns holding everything up that's just been cited over and over and over and over. What I find very weird here is, it just in, again, abstract, I don't want to spend too long on this, but did anyone else pick up on the phrase, the phallus as guarantor of masculinity?
Yes.
Can I just point out the hashtag masculinity so fragile that feminists put out there?
Mm-hmm.
You know, the idea that masculinity is really, really fragile and is not guaranteed on that. Now, it's actually something which someone brought up, I believe, on Honey Badger Radio. I don't think it was Dr. Farrell. I think it was someone else. The idea that, yes, masculinity is fragile in a sense, but not in the co-opted sense that feminists took it, so it just basically became shaming males. But it was the idea that masculinity is actually in a sort of state of flux as you develop, that it's basically the idea that you are a man or not a man is predicated on your actions.
I
like,
think,
not actually on your existence.
Yeah, I think Tom Golden brought that up.
Yeah, Tom Golden brought that up.
I couldn't tell you the name, but I know it's something which someone has mentioned, and again, it's sort of a general theme that's, I think, just been brought up on Honey Badger Radio quite a few times, actually. The idea that you are a man if you act in certain ways towards certain people, and that can then be removed from you, that social status can be removed from you if you fail to do that, as opposed to women where it is, you have a vagina, you're a woman by default as soon as you reach a certain age, that's it. That can never be taken away from you. And this, I think, really like highlights for all of these social sciencey people who seem to love ignoring this, the idea that your identity is actually not something that you define. This is the thing that these, you know, the crazy trans everything and 30 billion gender people seem to not get. It's your identity is only sort of half determined by you. The rest of it is by social consensus. You can go around declaring yourself a king. If no one believes it, then you're not. We've just finished the abstract, guys.
1 minute in.
Hey.
Let us continue.
Whoa.
Keywords.
Oh dear.
Affect. Phallus. Anality. Castration. Masculinity. Emotion. Feelings. Men's rights. New male studies. Men's rights movement. Quote, I decided to experiment with ways of getting men to express feelings. Warren Farrell.
Dr.
The men's rights
Warren
movement
Farrell, author,
has quickly gained a
did.
presence on many...
What?
They did strip him of his
of
qualifications.
his title. Yes.
Yeah.
I just
That's-
note that because it's kind. Yeah, if
It's
you're
really
doing
petty.
academic literature, you need to be doing that. But it's just interesting that they've sort of decided, no, you didn't spend the better part of a decade at university because this way you look worse.
Yeah. Basically, fuck that guy.
Just
What happened?
petty as hell. Even
And to
if I was
express
writing a paper about people I disagreed with, like Christy Winters, I'd still call her doctor in the paper. Like, I'm going to disagree with you with everything I'm writing, but I'm still at least going to use the correct title. For you.
Yeah. Besides,
Not
that'll make it funnier.
informally, though. It's violent and aggressive. It's politics. Political violence? Hang on. Is this in the same line as that internet violence, that cyber violence I've been hearing so much about? Still waiting on that improved version of the paper, UN. You know, that one
Yeah.
you promised us like 2 years ago? You said it'd be up in 2 weeks. Still waiting.
Okay.
I'm going to dig at the UN every chance I can on that.
In this movement, circumcision, especially routine neonatal circumcision, is framed as a violation of genital integrity, and thus the infant male's right to that integrity. There are...
Alice, were you going to say something, or...?
Yes, it is framed. It is framed as a violation. Have you ever watched one? It is a violation. I mean, by definition, genital integrity means genitals that are intact as they were formed in the womb. Unless there's something seriously wrong with the genitals as they were formed in the womb, as in physical deformities. Normal genitals intact as they were formed in the womb. And we take those normal male genitals and we violate that. We change them into something else. By definition, that is the violation of genital integrity. And he's saying that the intactivist movement is framing it as this?
Yeah,
Well, it's not wrong, because that is how the argument is framed. It's just that the argument happens to be correct. I don't know whether his writing is framed as this because he's trying to sort of hand-wave it away, or is saying it because that's actually one of the main framings for the intactivist argument.
Well, he is making a distinction. He's attempting to make a distinction between what I think he believes are legitimate men's rights concerns, fathers' rights, and intactivism, and what I guess he's going to tell us is illegitimate concerns, which is everything else, and probably a bunch of shit that that's not actually men's rights issues.
But rather to work through what is happening, how we might theorize the men's rights movement, what is motivating the movement, and how we need to shift the dialogue to consider ideas of shame and humiliation, which I will demonstrate is intimately caught up in castration anxiety.
What the hell is wrong with castration anxiety?
Castration makes me anxious.
Yeah, like, it makes me anxious. I don't even have one. Like, what's wrong? You know, other things that make me anxious? The idea of losing a hand, or an ear, or any other body part that functions to enhance my life and make it better. I mean, how is it that men in this society, how can they possibly be shamed by things like, castration anxiety? How would we created a society in which you shame people for not being afraid of losing a working body part? Like, do we have any groups that shame people for amputation anxiety? Oh, hey, you have a fear of losing your arm. That makes you a bad person.
Yeah.
The fuck? And the other thing is that I noticed that what we term castration anxiety, like psychological castration anxiety, he doesn't want to be castrated by that woman. Well, usually what's happening is she's abusing him. She's being emotionally or physically or psychologically abusive or sexually abusive. So not only do we classify it in terms of him losing his identity because she's being abusive. That's the whole castration thing. Oh, that man loses his identity when his woman is abusive. Not only do we categorize him, his loss of identity in terms of her being abusive, we shame him for it, for being afraid of it. Shame and humiliation is an indication that someone else controls your identity. That essentially what they're saying is that the men who are expressing this shame and humiliation are expressing this in response to having an identity that's controlled by someone besides themselves. So sort of where shame really comes from, is that you're being held to a standard and you're failing to achieve it. Well, who's holding men to that standard? And why are men feeling shame for failing to achieve it? Especially when you're looking at things like men feeling shame for being abused. Well, that means that they're being held to the standard of being completely invulnerable in the face of anybody, including abusers. So it's like, even when they say that men's rights activists are expressing shame and humiliation are the continual companions of people who tend to be disenfranchised in society. I just wanted to point that out. Mm-hmm. Shame and humiliation tends to be associated with everyone who's of lower status. So once again, you're sort of making an argument that your entire framework of reality, as you believe it to be, is incorrect. Because it's shame and humiliation isn't the emotions of people who have lots of money. I mean, maybe secretly, but people who are on top of society, people who aren't the slaves or indentured servants or the poor. They tend to not feel the same level of shame and humiliation as the slaves, the indentured servants, the poor. So isn't it interesting that they're pushing men's rights activists into the shame and humiliation category, which is where you find all of the disenfranchised people, and then they're using that to explain how men's rights activists' arguments that they're disenfranchised are incorrect.
The men's rights movement is distinct from other explorations of masculinity insofar as the movement itself is fundamentally situated in opposition to feminist theory and activism.
No. The only reason why it finds itself in opposition to feminist theory and activism is because feminists got in the way of men's issues. They became the blockade. It's not a reaction to that. Is that correct to say? I think it is.
Yeah, I mean, my note on that sentence was just to underline fundamentally, or more correctly, cross it out and write by necessity. Because by necessity, it was placed in opposition to feminist theory and activism because of how feminism has reacted to things.
Yes. All right, moving on.
Indeed,
okay, so if you want to just really quickly give
Yeah.
sort of like examples of this, like when it comes to sort of domestic violence case and what things like the Duluth model, that is feminism put into law, put into action. Things like microaggressions, I've actually got a video about that on my channel, about an hour long, looking through a paper which basically says there is no evidence for this, there's no correlation between these microaggressions and any sort of mental anguish or anything like that. There's no links, no scientific basis for it whatsoever, and yet there are universities enacting policies in line with it, and that stuff is straight out of feminist and social justice theory playbook. So, you know, people who oppose these things are necessarily having to stand in opposition to feminism. It's not necessarily that they want to oppose feminism. I mean, hell, I would imagine there's a lot of men's rights activists who would quite enjoy working with feminists, but the problem is, because of their framework that a lot of them come from, you are necessarily in opposition to them. Because of things like the Duluth model. It's like, oh, you only abuse women because your toxic masculinity and your sense of entitlement and your sense of male privilege in society and your domineering attitude towards women that you just have because reasons. You were just born with it because society.
Yes.
You have to be in opposition to that.
You have to, because, well, in order for you to make your case, you know, as an MRA, like whatever it is that you're arguing for, you need on some level to detangle and mystify, take the myths out of feminist theory, because that is essentially that's the predominant narrative. I mean, it's the one that even people who don't identify as feminists believe. That this is why, there are some anti-feminists out there that will make the statement, oh, feminism isn't that popular because when they're polled, it's always like a really low number of people that actually identify as feminist. And I don't think that that's actually evidence of anything, because if you ask the average person some questions that feminist theory has essentially made mainstream knowledge, they won't disagree. I think the average person is going to say things like, oh yeah, women, they need help. Women should be looked after. We should judge our society by how it treats its women. They're going to do that. They're still in the church, as it were, even if they don't call themselves feminists. And most of the time, when people are polled and they don't identify as feminists, the reason is usually because they don't think that they should wear the label. They might say, well, I don't really do any activism, or I wouldn't call myself a feminazi, or whatever. But I think that the wage gap is real, because I keep hearing about it. I think that domestic violence is something that men do to women. I think that rape is something that men do to women. I believe all of the things, So even if there aren't people who identify as feminist theory, or the feminist ideas are the predominant ideas. So MRAs are not just up against feminism. MRAs are against all the info that everyone has, and that they're essentially using in their day-to-day life. So this necessarily puts them in opposition on some level, because they have to be able to tell people these are the issues we're facing, and a lot of it flies in the face of what they've been told.
Feminism, from its inception by Charles Fourier, is about judging society by how well it benefits women, to the exclusion of men. You can see from Charles Fourier's examples of how society needs to benefit women. He did indeed mean to the exclusion of men. In other words, men are expected to create that benefit for women. Where else is it going to come from? So in a system, if feminism is a system that judges society by how it benefits women, by definition, it's going to marginalize how any discussion of how society benefits or does not benefit men. It creates this particular gender role. Women are to be benefited, and their benefit is how society is judged, and men are to manufacture that benefit. It creates that gender role, never has disavowed its origination in that gender role, and has never apparently deviated from it. It just appropriated the language of equality in order to perpetuate this idea that women need to be benefited. This idea that women need to be benefited, they weren't interested in creating equality. They were interested in using equality because women could be seen as victims of inequality. So they could create this perpetual machine of benefiting women. And this entire construct, if you want to get a toehold in to start talking about the issues that men face, you have to oppose it. And I don't know if this actually came out, please tell me if people understand what I'm saying. Mm-hmm. If you are a structure in which you judge society by how it benefits women, in order to create any space to talk about how society benefits men or doesn't benefit men, you have to oppose the organizational principle of society must benefit women. Yeah. And there's no way around it. There's no way out of it, and there's no way around it.
The author says that he finds the men's rights movement as more reactive rather than politically advantageous. You can be reactive and still politically advantageous. All being reactive means is you are responding to a stimulus. That's it. Mm-hmm. A reaction to a stimulus can be advantageous. Stick your hand in a fire, the reaction is to remove it. That's an advantageous reaction. The same thing can happen in politics. It shouldn't be that difficult, but apparently it is for this person. And it's located the problem, namely women and feminism, No, women is not a synonym for feminism. That's why there are women in the movement who coincidentally tend to take the same position as men, except on this show where they outrank them and generally speak over them all the time. Karen! But anyway, another thing, it has yet to outline a theory of its call to action. No. Everything I've seen from the men's rights movement generally, I mean, again, I hark you back to the thing that you dismissed earlier in the paper, intactivism and fathers' rights. That is an outline for the call to action. What do we want? Equal parenting under the law. What else do you want? To not have parts of our bodies cut off when we're children.
Infants.
Yeah, it's like that is part of the theory of what they want. The study of masculinity, yes, I'm being related to this because, yeah. So to study masculinity requires the field must be informed by and committed to a pro-feminist agenda. As we've already covered, this is most of the reason that the MRM is necessarily post-feminist is because feminism has got into place legal problems. So it can't take a pro-feminist stance by definition, because the reason that it exists is because it holds that the feminist interpretation and the feminist position is wrong. Therefore, taking the feminist position is not an option because you are fundamentally opposed to it. I don't know why that's so difficult for this guy to understand, but it is. And apparently the reason, because it was, rape culture and misogyny and transphobia, yeah, because lies. And what I find hilarious is that he then goes on to even list the things which are horrendously debunked, like the faceless acts of violence committed on the internet each and every day whenever a woman dares to speak.
Mm-hmm.
Still waiting on the return of that paper, UN. The only one which has ever used internet violence, serious thing, and then had to be taken down because it was full of shit. And when you look at actual objective information, like the Pew Research Center about internet, people getting mean things said to them on the internet and all of that stuff, more men than women experience it. It's generally near parity, but it lies more on the side of men. It's just that women are more likely to complain about it. And I find one of the sentences, which I believe the college is right in the middle of right here, too many suicides of victims of bullying. You want to talk about suicide rates, do ya? Is that a kettle of fish you really want to open?
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing is that...
Because I'll just raise up, much as I don't like to poster boy him for this, I'll just raise up Earl Silverman, the guy who took his life because the Canadian government stood in his way when he tried to open a men's shelter, because it was being informed by feminist theory. All of the domestic violence models were informed by feminist theory, so he couldn't do it by their rubrics. It just wasn't a thing. This is why. All you have to do is just an actual message to this author. Listen. Just listen to what people are saying, and then you will understand this stuff.
Yep.
But you don't want to listen. That's the problem.